Hello, it's Willie from the Ozarks, and we're ready for our August 29th lesson in A Course in Miracles Workbook for Students. Lesson 241. I think it's 241, yes. We're reading out of the original edition. This holy instant is salvation come. This holy instant is salvation come. And this is in our next chapter, you might call it, 10 lessons that are all under the heading of what is the world. So we'll read that the next 10 days, and we'll also read this holy instant is salvation come. We'll read that right now. What joy there is today. It is a time of special celebration, for today holds out the instant to the darkened world where its release is set. The day has come when sorrows pass away and pain is gone. The glory of salvation dawns today upon a world set free. This is the time of hope for countless millions. They will be united now as you forgive them all. They will be united now as you forgive them all. For I will be forgiven by you today. For I will be forgiven by you today. That's Jesus talking. We have forgiven one another. This is the prayer. We have forgiven one another now, and so we come at last to you again. Father, your Son, who never left, returns to heaven and his home. How glad are we to have our sanity restored to us, and to remember that we all are one. This holy instant is salvation come. Okay, let's go take a look in our text reading for today. And we're ready for a new section, still in chapter 4, the root of all evil, but ready for the constant state. You know, he alludes to the constant state in our lesson for today. We'll read it here in a minute, but let's see, the day has come when sorrow passes away and pain is gone. The glory of salvation dawns today upon a world set free. Just a minute. Well, anyway, what joy there is today. It is a time of special celebration. Anyway, we'll read it here in a minute. The holy instant is This holy instant is salvation come. But anyway, what I was going to show you, and I didn't see it right there, we'll look at it here in a minute, was we're already seated in heavenly places with Christ. We learned that in the Bible long ago, but we didn't really understand it. Now we're starting to get a little better clarity. He's patiently trying to show us. He's been patient with us for a long time, over 2,000 years. Okay, so let's go to our lesson, the constant state. Before I read that, I want to point out something I said yesterday that I'd like to make a little correction. It said there in paragraph 79, psychologists are in a good position to realize that the ego is capable of making and accepting as real some very distorted associations. The confusion of sex with aggression and the resulting behavior, which is perceived as the same for both, serves as an example. I had mentioned that I think what he means is a certain thing. I said it in a way that I kind of limited it to my definition and my understanding. And I don't want you to stop and let my understanding cloud your ability to comprehend even more than I've comprehended, okay? So let that be as it stands. There's a lot here, and I don't want to say that I've got it all figured out, because I'm learning like you all are. This is understandable to the psychologist and does not produce surprise. The lack of surprise, however, is not a sign of understanding. It is a symptom of the psychologist's ability to accept as reasonable a compromise which is clearly senseless, to attribute it to the mental illness of the patient rather than his own, and to limit his questions about both the patient and himself to the trivial. Jesus sees us, the teacher and the student, the patient and the therapist, as in this together. If one's insane, they're both insane. So we got to see each other as holy, and that's the constant state. Such relatively minor confusion of the ego, such relatively minor confusions of the ego are not among its more profound misassociations, although they do reflect them. Your egos have been blocking the more important questions which your mind should ask. You do not understand a patient while you yourself are willing to limit the questions you raise about his mind because you are also accepting these limits for yours. See our connectiveness with each other? This makes you unable to heal him and yourselves. Be also unwilling to adapt to any situation in which miracle-mindedness is unthinkable. That state in itself is enough to demonstrate that the perception is wrong, because miracle-mindedness is what is correct, right, and is the wholly natural way of and state of being. Okay, but if you haven't already turned there, I'm sure you already have by now if you're going to follow along. We're ready for the constant state. Before I read it, let me just show you. If you can see it back there, that's where I had my kale planted that some varmint ate all the tops, and I'm hoping it'll come back. So I have some cabbage. All the brassicas you can plant right now and for the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. It's a little early, really, but this one I'm going to plant it. But I'm not going to dare plant it until I get this whatever's eating this thing out of the garden. So I've got a live animal trap set over there. Put some cantaloupe in it. I heard that was good for groundhogs, and that's what I'm going to try to get. I'll let you know when I get him, and I'll go let him go somewhere. But anyway, I wanted to tell you a little bit about this is Stonehead Cabbage, and let me just getting dirt all over my book. Let me tell you just a minute about Stonehead Cabbage. And I did not bring the right. We're not gonna. Well, yeah, here we go. Stonehead Cabbage, Cabbage oleracea. Variety is capitata, and then the cultivar is Stonehead. It's a hybrid, and you're to plant it 6 to 8 weeks before the first frost, which this is a little bit more than 8 weeks, so I'm a little early, and I've already got a pretty good sized plant, so I'll probably have to repot them, and put these into some bigger pots so that they can just keep growing nicely. And, we'll just pull them out and look at all those roots. We'll put them in a big pot. And then here in another week after I've caught this critter, we'll let them, I'll plant them. But anyway, Stonehead Cabbage. Look what I found about it, though. Very interesting. It does not become, this particular variety, it doesn't become bitter in the heat. And it's slow to bolt. So no, what am I doing? I'm reading to you about the Cherokee lettuce that I had the other day. I need to be careful with these cards, don't I? I know it says of it that it's more resistant to heat, but it's really good in the cold, and it'll grow really well even after the frost if it gets some cool weather as it develops, and then it can take some really pretty strong cold temperatures, probably down into the teens. It'll still be fine. And it gets sweeter. That's what's really nice about cabbage grown in the fall. It is spring too, but the cabbage and the cauliflowers, and the brassicas tend to taste really good when they get some frost. I found this on WebMD. It says raises level of beta carotene, lutein, and other heart protective antioxidants. It helps lower something called oxidized LDL, which is linked to hardening of the arteries. Since it eases inflammation, it can help prevent heart disease. So, that cabbage, each cabbage, it said that the purple cabbage is even better, the red cabbage. But they all have that quality about them, as I understand. All right, now I've lost my page. Let's go back to where we are. The constant state. It cannot be emphasized too often. Okay, if it can't be emphasized too often, we need to really get this. It cannot be emphasized too often that correcting perception is merely a temporary expedient. It is necessary to do so only because misperception is a block to knowledge, while accurate perception is a stepping stone towards it. You understand? That what we want to do, if we want to get our egos to where they're not making such a mess that we can't see the truth. So we got to get even our ego has to get lined up. We have to be a really, the best we can be. So that it doesn't, if our egos are constantly angry and upset, we're not going to see the truth. But it's still temporary. The whole value of right perception lies in the inevitable judgment which it entails that is unnecessary. This removes the block entirely. You may ask how this is possible as long as you appear to be living in this world, and since this is a sensible question, it has a sensible answer. You must be careful, however, that you really understand the question. What is the you who is living in this world? 82. Immortality is a constant state. It is as true now as it ever was or ever will be because it implies no change at all. It is not a continuum, nor is it understood by being compared to an opposite. Knowledge never involves comparisons. That is its essential difference from everything else the mind can grasp. A little knowledge is not dangerous except to the ego. Vaguely it senses threat, and being unable to realize that a little knowledge is a meaningless phrase, since all and a little in this context are the same, the ego decides that since all is impossible, the fear does not lie there. A little, however, is a scarcity concept, and this the ego understands well. A little, then, is perceived as the real threat. 83. The essential thing to remember is that the ego does not recognize the real source of its perceived threat. And if you associate yourself with the ego, you do not perceive the whole situation as it is. Only your allegiance to it gives the ego any power over you. Isn't that something? Only your allegiance to the ego gives it any power over you. Remember, we're supposed to be withdrawing our devotion or our love to our egos. 84. We have spoken of the ego as if it were a separate thing acting on its own. This was necessary to persuade you that you cannot dismiss it lightly and must realize how much of your thinking is ego-directed. We cannot safely let it go at that, however, or you will regard yourselves as necessarily conflicted as long as you are here, or more properly, as long as you believe that you are here. We're not really here anyway, are we? We're dreaming this. Anything that's not love is a dream. 85. The ego is nothing more than a part of your belief about yourself. Your ego is nothing more than a part of your belief about yourself. Your other life has continued without interruption and has been and always will be totally unaffected by your attempts to dissociate. Your other life has continued without interruption and has been and always will be totally unaffected by your attempts to dissociate. The ratio of repression and dissociation varies with the individual ego illusion, but dissociation is always involved, or you would not believe that you are here. In learning to escape from the illusions you have made, your great debt to each other is something you must never forget. Okay, let's read that again. In learning to escape from the illusions you have made, your great debt to each other is something you must never forget. It reminds me of there in Romans where the author says, owe no man anything but to love one another and thus fulfill the law of Christ. So in this respect, In learning to escape from the illusions you have made, your great debt to each other is something you must never forget. It is exactly the same debt you owe to me. Whenever you react egotistically towards each other, you are throwing away the graciousness of your indebtedness and the holy perception it would produce. The term holy can be used here because as you learn how much you are indebted to the whole sonship, which includes me, you come as close to knowledge as perception ever can. The gap is then so small that knowledge can easily flow across it and obliterate it forever. You have very little trust in me as yet it will increase as you turn more and more often to me instead of your ego for guidance. Remember, that's cry for help. Every time you notice your mood, your behavior, your feelings, I've lost the peace and joy, that's when you got to stop and ask for help. And we're going to get increasingly better at doing that, he says. The results will convince you increasingly that your choice in turning to me is the only sane one you can make. No one who has learned from experience that one choice brings peace and joy, while another brings chaos and disaster, needs much conditioning. Okay, let's stop there for today. Let me mark that. We'll be ready for paragraph 87 when we pick it up tomorrow. All right, let's go back and look at what is the world. What is the world? The world is false perception. It is born of error and has not left its source. It will remain no longer than the thought which gave it birth is cherished. When the thought of separation has been changed to one of true forgiveness, will the world be seen in quite another light, and one which leads to truth, where all the world must disappear, and all its errors vanish. Now its source has gone, and its effects are gone as well. The world was made as an attack on God. The world was made as an attack on God. You ever wonder why we can't seem to find God? I always wondered that for years. And now I'm starting to understand, well, shoot, I made the world myself, and I made it as an attack on God. So we don't want to do that. It symbolizes fear. And what is fear except love's absence? Thus the world was meant to be a place where God could enter not, and where his Son could be apart from him. Here was perception born. For knowledge could not cause such insane thoughts. But eyes deceive, and ears hear falsely. Now mistakes become quite possible, for certainty has gone. The mechanisms of illusion have been born instead, and now they go to find what has been given them to seek. Their aim is to fulfill the purpose which the world was made to witness and make real. They see in its illusions but a solid base, where truth exists. Upheld apart from lies, yet everything that they report is but illusion, which is kept apart from truth. As sight was made to lead away from truth, it can be redirected. Sounds become the call of God, and all perception can be given a new purpose by the one whom God appointed Savior to the world. Follow his light and see the world as he beholds it. Hear his voice alone in all that speaks to you, and let him give you peace and certainty, which you have thrown away, but heaven has preserved for you in him. Referring to the Holy Spirit, as I understand. Let us not rest content until the world has joined our changed perception. Let us not be satisfied until forgiveness has been made complete. Ooh, now there's when we go to our meditations and we stay in our quiet times as long as we feel like we need. Well, then what we want to do, it says, let us not be satisfied until forgiveness has been made complete. So, do the best you can when you're meditating, and bring all your unforgivenesses and turn them into forgivenesses at the altar of truth in the inner holy of holies. And then, after you spend a few minutes, you'll know that, yeah, I feel satisfied. I've learned something. I've awakened a little bit more. I feel refreshed. All the joy is increased. Your peace is increased. Your awakeness is increased. Your alertness has increased. And I tell you what I started doing yesterday. I tried it. It really works nice. And I hope you don't get too caught up with me talking about time so much. But, I want to do things the way that the master kind of mapped it out. I didn't want to set my alarm like I was telling you. So what I did is I set my stopwatch. And that way I didn't have to kind of look at the time and remember. Because what I do is I'll look at the time, and then by the end of my meditation, I don't even remember what time it was when I started because I forget. So what I did is I just set my stopwatch on my phone. And and then when I feel like I've meditated to that place where I feel like I've met this deep need of satisfaction, of practicing forgiveness, laying forgiveness on the altar, well, then I can kind of glance at my watch or my stopwatch, and if it says, like last night, it said 22 minutes, I thought, well, that was a great meditation. Okay, but if it had said 10 minutes, I probably would have just shut my eyes and said, well, I probably ought to spend a little more time than that. Okay, so that last paragraph. Let us not rest content until the world has joined our changed perception. Let us not be satisfied until forgiveness has been made complete. And let us not attempt to change our function. We must save the world. For we who made it must behold it through the eyes of Christ, that what was made to die be restored to everlasting life. And our lesson, 241. This holy instant is salvation come. What joy there is today! It is a time of special celebration, for today holds out the instant to the darkened world where its release is set. The day has come when sorrows pass away and pain is gone. The glory of salvation dawns today upon a world set free. This is the time of hope for countless millions. They will be united now as you forgive them all. For I will be forgiven by you today. And the prayer, we have forgiven one another now, and so we come at last to you again. Father, your Son, who never left, returns to heaven and his home. How glad are we to have our sanity restored to us and to remember that we all are one. And that what I was trying to read to you earlier was actually in the prayer. I thought it was in the reading, but it was this part where we were getting ready to read the constant state, and he makes reference to it here in the prayer. We have forgiven one another now, and we come at last to you again. Father, your Son who never left, that's the constant state, your Son who never left, returns to heaven and his home. How glad are we to have our sanity restored to us and to remember that we all are one. Until tomorrow, practice this holy instant is salvation come.